Welcome everybody into another episode of The Voice of College Football, and we are implementing a new little episode here called Talking Huskers, and I am joined by my first guest. Very happy to have him join the show, Adam CARRIKER. The man needs no introduction. You know, he is a big-time, all-time defensive end at Nebraska, played 8 seasons in the NFL, had a very, very successful career at Nebraska, Hall of Famer, All-American. You know the drill. So, Adam, I'm going to go ahead and open the floor to you, man. You can find him over at CARRIKERChronicles.com, Adam CARRIKER, or CARRIKER Chronicles on YouTube as well. Links will be in the description. But what's going on, Adam? And do you want to tell the people where they can find you and what you got going on or upcoming on your stuff?
Well, first of all, they can find you also at CARRIKERChronicles.com, talking with the Huskers as well as your Big Ten show. Yep. So if you want to keep up on everything that Justin's doing, whether it be talking Huskers, Big Ten, etc., you can go to CARRIKERChronicles.com is the website. A bunch of new faces there doing a great job, podcast writers. You can go to CARRIKER's crew, and then you can find, it says Voice of College Football Huskers, Voice of College Football Big Ten show, and that's Justin's continuous content as well. And I think we've got like 15 podcasts. Obviously, you're contributing to those. We got about 6 or 7 writers, and then I'm doing some stuff as well at CARRIKERChronicles.com. Also, YouTube, just type in CARRIKER Chronicles. You'll see my big face and my flapping gums, and hopefully it's somewhat entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is. I will tell people it is, and I'm sure most people have seen it, but just in case you haven't, get over there and check that out and show him some love. And again, appreciate you putting me on the website. That was super cool, and it's a great opportunity. So
for sure.
Let's go ahead and dive into a few things here. Right off the top, I didn't expect to have to ask about Paul Finebaum today. It's not somebody I necessarily love talking about on my shows, but he's got his name in the news again, mainly for bumping his gums a little bit. So, his overall thoughts on the Matt Rule situation. He was kind of just talking about how Matt Rule doesn't necessarily have a say in this because he has, the team can't even make a bowl game, this, that, and the third. It's an ESPN, SEC and the ESPN. We know their agreement. We know how they like to push the SEC, and it seemed to be like they set that up for, a talking point or a polarized subject. But let me go ahead and get your overall takeaways on that comment, and what's your thoughts on what how much stock you put into what he overall said there. And do you think it was just kind of a shot at the Big Ten in general, just from the SEC side of things?
I think it was totally a setup. We all know the ESPN SEC, as I call it, they're in bed together. And so when Matt Rule says the Big Ten should have pretty much 4 teams in the college football playoff every year, well, the one conference that's going to take big time umbrage with that is the SEC, because they want like 4 to 82 teams in the playoff every year because they're just that freaking good in their own minds. And really? Hey, that's my daughter Desi. I've been up here for 3 hours. No one's come in. You say hi, Desi. All right.
I love it. No, we needed a cameo. My dog's going to come in the background.
We just talked about a show I did back in the day, and a kid fell off the chair and everything else. So it's like perfect timing. Exactly. All right. So that's one of my twin daughters. That's Desi. But no, it's one of those things where it was absolutely set up. The SEC sees a Big Ten head coach saying, hey, there should be 4 Big Ten teams in the college football playoff every year. And I think easily there's going to be 3 this year. Ohio State, Oregon are easy to pluck right away. Penn State, they would have been in a 12-team playoff 5 of the past 7 years. Does USC play any defense along with offense? Does Iowa play any offense along with defense? Michigan, let's not forget, they just won a national title. They're missing a bunch of starters. But I think it's a logical thing to think that the SEC and the Big Ten, where the best football is going to be played, is going to get the most amount of teams in. And saying anywhere from 3 to 5 for each conference, I think is perfectly fair. I think what happened, though, was the SEC doesn't like that. Yeah. They're in bed with ESPN. So they said, hey, let's set up the coach whose team has not been to a bowl game since 2016, who hasn't won their first game of the year since 2019, et cetera, and let's lambaste him to make our point and also poke at the Big Ten at the same time. Now, I will say this. Matt Rule was simply responding to a question.
Yep.
I don't know that Paul's entirely wrong. In Matt Rule's defense, he's responding to a question. Okay, so it's hard to get on somebody for that. In Paul Finebaum's defense, how about we go to a bowl game first, and then Nebraska folks can start giving opinions on college football playoffs. So it goes both ways. When it comes to Paul Finebaum in general, I can't stand him. His SEC bias is beyond obvious. He doesn't try to hide it. It's ridiculous. I never pay attention to anything that he says because there's an agenda behind everything that he says. And my favorite thing that's happened at any of these media days, SEC, ACC, Big Ten, etc., is when Lane Kiffin basically said, I don't know what you're good at. Now, there was more to that statement, but at the end he goes, I don't know what you're good at. And I was like, that's a Nebraska guy right there, and I love it. So, anyways.
You saw when he was confronted by a coach, he kind of, shelled up, and then they panned away from it. Went and, so they tried to avoid that little heat there on Finebaum. But him and Lane Kiffin are friends, so it was interesting to see Lane Kiffin go after him like that, because who would make comments like that about their friend? So it is funny when he does get confronted, he's not as emboldened to speak his mind. But I think I think I reject the notion that for a head coach, especially to have an opinion, at least on this, that he needs to have a team that is capable of making it, or is projected to make it. I think, I just think I reject that notion, and I do agree with you. I just think his messaging, of course, is a little aggressive, but that's the way the internet is. They know the aggressive nature. If he comes out and he just kind of fires shots, it's going to get traction. It's going to get spread around. And of course, with Nebraska's fan base, it's definitely going to get spread around and a lot of attention. So, very, very interesting stuff there. So, and another part of it too, he didn't say we deserve 4 and the SEC deserves 3. It wasn't any shot. Like both teams could deserve 4. That with the 12-team playoff, it's very, very reasonable. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the Big Ten Media Days as a whole, because you were out there, boots on the ground, kind of getting, out there and meeting people and interviewing people. So I just want to get your initial takeaways before I ask specific questions. So what are some of your initial takeaways from being there at Media Days?
So I went to Big 12 Media Days back when Nebraska was in the Big 12, 2006. So this is my first time being on the other side of it. And it is interesting. Lucas Oil Stadium is a beautiful, beautiful place to have it done. I was told by others that a couple of years ago, it was actually in like a hotel basement. And I'm like, really? That's awful. So crazy. It's a beautiful place to do it. Hotels right across the street. It's cool because you've got like PJ Fleck just walking right by, and we didn't bring him over for an interview. I shared that story with you, but that was the owner of the radio station's call, but you could have grabbed him. There's all these people that are just right there. You can build relationships. You can build rapport. You can bring them on for an interview. A couple things that stood out to me. I'm not the first one to comment on this, but Deshaun Foster, his opening statement, the guy who owns 93.7 The Ticket, Derek Pearson, loves Deshaun Foster. Talked about how much film he watched as a player. He actually was voted on for some sort of award at the Carolina Panthers for watching more film than any other player. So he's the guy who's going to be a great coach. But I've said all along, he's never been an offensive coordinator. He's never had to call plays. Now all of a sudden he's the head guy at a Power 5 program, a Power 2 program, honestly. And I'm like, there's going to be a learning curve. He can walk into any recruit's basement or any recruit's house, in all of California. He's got immediate cred because he's Deshaun Foster. He's got a relatability. He's going to be able to recruit maybe even better than Chip Kelly did, probably better. But there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be things he's never done that you've just got to do them. You don't know how to do them until you do them. And it kind of irritated Derek because I equated that to what happened with his introductory statement, which was not good at all. No. And Derek was like, well, what's that have to do with coaching? I'm like, it's an example. I've never been up in the bright lights with everybody on me, everybody watching. And he clearly was unprepared. Like, you got to come prepared. And so I think he's ultimately going to be a very good coach for UCLA, but I think there's going to be a learning curve. PJ Fleck, I know Nebraska fans love to take jabs at him, but every year they frickin' beat us with less talent. So until we start winning, by the way, they've been to 5 straight bowl games and they've won 9 games 2 of the past 3 years. And if you take out 2020, 9 games plus, because they were 11-2, 3 of the past 4 years. So that is crow I don't like eating, but it is what it is. So we can take all the jabs we want, but we got to win. But PJ goes up to the podium, and I called it. I said, he's not going to allow any times for any questions. He's going to take up the whole 15 minutes because he doesn't want to answer questions, and he did. And then they basically said, you still have to answer a question or 2, and he did. But that's just him being him. I don't know. There's other takeaways as well. I know Dan Lanning kind of clapped back at Kirby Smart a little bit on one of the comments that he made. Yep. At the end of the day, like, football starts next week.
Yeah.
And that's what really matters.
100%. 100%. So, going into some questions about the media days, talking about football, when Matt Rule got up there, with the confidence that he had, and Matt Rule's not one of those guys that's going to go out there and talk up a team that he doesn't believe in. So when he's going out there and he, is kind of making it known, like, we expect to be this, we don't want our players thinking we're going to go 8-4, because then we expect to lose 4 games. With him kind of putting this stuff out there to the public and kind of speaking on how he feels about this team going forward, is that a way of kind of setting the standard for this team and making sure the players kind of know that, he believes in them? But also, what does it say about his confidence going into this year? Because, talking about it feeling more like a year 3 than a year 2, what are your thoughts on Matt Rule's confidence in this team?
So I love his confidence. I think it's awesome. All right. I might be a little bit alone in this opinion, but I wish he wouldn't say that for the media.
I'm with you.
I always felt like Scott Frost cut his own honeymoon period short by things he said in front of a microphone. I thought he was his own worst PR enemy. And Matt Rule is not his own worst PR enemy. He's phenomenal at speaking. Personally, I would rather he go, because there's a saying, and I actually just saw it the other day, okay? Act weak when you're strong, act strong when you're weak. So in other words, you might believe this, and that can be what you can tell your team in meetings. And you can even tell them, I'm going to go up and I'm going to say certain things that may not match what I tell you because I want a certain perception while I may believe this over here. And that's okay. He doesn't owe us anything other than the fact that I'm just here so I won't get fined. Don't give us that line. Like, give us something.
Right.
I like being under the radar. I like being overlooked. Hey, Paul Finebaum wants to take easy jabs in Nebraska. Well, right now we can. I would love for our play on the field to do our speaking and almost underplay it and be like, we're making progress. We're getting better. I expect us to be better than last year. And we're going to be the hardest playing team you've seen. And I can't wait till the first game. And I wish he'd just kind of leave it there, because I don't want this season to somehow not go the way he thinks it will. And then it's that much worse. And I'm obviously rooting for, 16-0 national championship. But I just don't want it to somehow there be injuries. There be things he doesn't foresee. You still have a probably true freshman quarterback who knows what you're really going to get out of him, because he's still a true freshman despite how prepared and talented he may be, which is as ready as any true freshman quarterback has ever been at Nebraska, even more so than Tommy Frazier, the first true freshman quarterback to start at Nebraska. And so for me, I wish he wouldn't do it, but he is a smart guy. He is great with the microphone in front of him. And so I'm just kind of curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah. And I feel like he does a good job of kind of throwing in little things that he could point to, because, in little ways he kind of does allude to, we never know what's going to happen, all this other stuff. But yeah, with those comments, do you think that impacts, how do you think that impacts the locker room and the players? Do you think that makes a difference in their eyes, whether he's talking, about how good they are, or whether he's being very close to the vest about what he expects from this team? Do you think that the players pay attention to that at all?
So in my opinion, I think he's trying to make sure Husker fans are excited. Because it was really hard when all we needed was one win and we went out and lost 4 games in a row and couldn't get to a bowl game. So I think he wants to make sure Husker fans are excited. I think he set up the spring game. I mean, he said, we're going to air it out. And then they set it up for there to be a bunch of points scored and for it to be an exciting game. The way it was set up that way. I think he wants that excitement in Husker Nation. I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is I think he's really talking to his team. Like, he's talked a ton about how they weren't the same last year on Saturday the way they were the rest of the week. Guys would literally come in the locker room and they'd be checking to see if they're trending on X. Okay. And so I think he's talking to his players as much as anyone, but that's where I wish he would just, like those intimate team meetings that you have when it's just you and 100 and some guys, and there's a big world and a whole state out there and a bunch of people rooting for you. But I wish he would just, in those settings, be like, this is what I think. This is what I see. This is what I believe. And it may not match what I say publicly, but I'm trying to make it so we fly under the radar so we can hit somebody in the mouth and they won't see it coming. He's taking a little different approach, but I do think he's in large part talking to his players when he's saying these things publicly.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go ahead and just move a little bit forward and talking about, we'll just keep it with football here. when he's talking about, the fumbling problem and talking to Coach Ron Brown, and Coach Ron Brown just kind of said, you're not coaching it hard enough. One of the things that I said throughout the season is in my opinion too, I feel like a lot of the turnovers we had last year were a lot of mental things. I feel like a lot of players were maybe playing tight, putting a lot of pressure on themselves to not turn the ball over. But when he's talking about he wants players to play through their mistakes, and when it comes to coaching corrective actions for mistakes, what are some of the things that you think that they can actually do to improve upon these turnovers? And I know they can practice it and practice all the time, but until, like he talked about, as the season went along, it started to click, they're holding the ball a little tighter. How much of that is mental and how much of that is coaching in your opinion?
I think it's a combination of both. I think a lot of it is mental. I think a lot of it is, hey, we look one way when we practice during the week and then we look different on Saturday.
Yeah.
And I think that's a ton of it, because I know they work on ball security on offense, and I know they work on strips, and they do the pick drill and things of that nature on defense. And we still were one of the worst teams in the country in turnovers. And I think a lot of that is just based on, it's kind of in the back of the players' minds. Like, this is what we've done recently. So it creates a certain level of expectation, whether you like it or not, or want to admit it or not. And then I think, if you're worried about whether you're trending on X, you're much more likely to make a mistake. And it's not just Nebraska players. That's a tough thing every player today has to deal with. So, I remember when I played, there wasn't a such thing as X. The Facebook had just really started before they dropped the. And, I was always keenly aware of, I was going to get my butt ripped in film if I messed up. And that's just a room full of guys that are, on my team together. Or when I was to the league, there was some times when I had a great play, I might see it on ESPN. There were some times I didn't have a great play. Oh, bah, there I am. Awesome. It's awesome. So I can only imagine what these guys have to deal with. That being said, I chatted with, I think he'd be all right with me mentioning his name, Chancellor Brewington, Chancellor, at Big Ten Media Days. And he's like, when they had the turnover issues under Frost, they would spend about 5 minutes at the start of practice, ball security on offense and causing turnovers on defense. And all of a sudden 5 minutes turned into 10 minutes. And then they would talk more in meetings. And then it turned into 15, 20 minutes. And he's like, at a certain point, we were spending like 30 minutes of a 2-hour practice on this one thing. And it was just getting worse because we were overthinking it. So I think it's one of those things where you address it. You make a point, you say we're going to work on it, but I think you keep it short and to the point so you get the physical reps in without overloading kids mentally.
100%. All right, let's go ahead and move on to comments. So talking about the new coaching rule that they came out with about a month ago, where the analysts and those type of coaches, specialists, they could work with the specialists. They could work with, we got Jamar Mosey, who's going to be working with the offensive specialists, which is big because his son Isaiah is visiting this weekend. So he's going to be working with those offensive weapons. So, potentially a chance to work with his son there. But how important do you think this new coaching role is? He talked about having one coach work on development, maybe two coaches at each position group, one coach work on, with the David Huffkins of the world and your other guys, like he mentioned Keona Wilhite as well. How much of a factor is this going to play, and how important is this going to be moving forward for this team?
I think it's huge, and it's especially huge for teams that are focused on development, which is what Matt Rule's all about. He's all about finding diamonds in the rough and then developing them into really good football players. He did it at Temple. He did it at Baylor. He's put a bunch of guys in the league. Yeah. And his recruiting classes were good, but they weren't elite. Right. But yet he was putting a ton of guys in the league because he's big on development. If you're one of those schools, and everybody wants to recruit the best players, but if you're one of those schools that always recruits the best players, always, this may not be as big a deal to you. But if you're a school like Nebraska, and I can't even think of another school that has emphasized publicly developing players within their program in the entire country as much as Matt Rule has done since he's come here. So this may be as big a benefit. And they run 3 groups at practice. There's 3 different stations with offense versus defense, and they rotate. It might be 7-on-7, 9-on-7, then it might be blitz drill over here. And they're constantly, and this is per his conversations versus Tom Osborne, how they used to run practices and what worked here. So I think for Nebraska, the more coaches you can have involved and the more time you can spend developing, especially with a school that's going to emphasize it, I think it's a big deal for Nebraska. If you're like, I don't know, Alabama, and Kalen DeBoer's done a great job recruiting, but especially under Nick Saban, and they develop players. But if you got the best guys walking in, skill and talent wise, right out the gate, it may not be as big a deal to you. But I feel like Matt Rule's going to maximize this as much as he can.
100%. I agree. He talked about having a plan, and he would come out with more of a structured plan going forward. So he knows what works for him. He doesn't shy away from, he's adaptable. He's adaptable to the modern college football world, but he knows what has worked for him. He knows what he's doing in terms of development. So, he seems like he has a plan. Ron Brown, I think one of the things that flew under the radar was that we're going to have a dedicated kick returner, punt returner coach in Ron Brown, of all people. Mm-hmm. That is huge, because the last time it's been a while since we've had a really consistent return game, whether it be punt return, kick return, but also along with that, that's as important as offense, because that's getting your offense closer, that's setting yourself up, setting your true freshman quarterback up, with a shorter field, being able to kind of operate and, not having more opportunities to make more mistakes by having to go 99 yards, that type of deal. So that's another big factor too, that I think flying on the radar, because Ron Brown's going to be a great coach, also working with fullbacks as well there. So
absolutely. I'm excited. I'm excited that we're going to try to emphasize the fullback. It wasn't as much last year as we had hoped, but those guys have had a chance to develop. I know a couple of them got dinged up and they were younger. So I'm hoping we emphasize the fullback. And I'm not one of these guys that's like, oh, we use the fullback, we're winning titles. No. Yeah. I think it's another element that helps make us better. I don't know that it's going to be like, oh, we're undefeated now. But you've got someone dedicated to it who understands it. And Ron Brown, he's coached receivers, he's coached running backs. He'd been here a bajillion years. He brings a wealth of knowledge. And our return game, like seriously, like, are we a D1 team or are we a middle school team when it comes to our return game? And no, I've never returned a kick in my life, so feel free to take jabs at me, and it's okay. But can we just average 10 yards per return? I've sat in a million NFL meetings, okay, and that's what special teams coaches want. 10 yards, a first down every time you return the ball. Can we just do that? I feel like we can do that.
100%. Yeah. And so I think a lot of people their attention is going to be drawn to that this year, and we should see a good improvement in. And on top of that, we got athletes for days that can get back there and return these kicks. So we got a plethora of guys. Even Tommy Hill was our top returner last year. Got a lot of guys who can go out there and make some plays and be able to make guys miss. So I'm excited to see how that kind of develops too. Last thing on Big Ten Media Days before we move on to the recruiting weekend, the NIL comments. Now, my take on this, and he said we're doing great, but there's a long way to go, and he didn't want to sugarcoat it. And he mentioned before a while back, but when he was talking about NIL for the quarterbacks and made headlines in terms of the amount of 1.5 mil, I think, to land one of these guys out of the portal. Do you think this was kind of almost another call to action, having this big recruiting weekend coming up? Do you think those comments might have been intentional to kind of be like, okay, we really need your help and support in this, especially in the near future with the guys that we have coming up on campus?
Absolutely. It's like playing the new college football video game, and your team, and I'm not equating this to the Huskers ratings or level of talent, just in general. If your team's a bunch of 75s and you're playing a guy who's got a team's bunch of 85s, he's got an advantage. I mean, that's pretty easy to understand. And so what Rule is saying is, yes, we've done pretty good. But if we truly want to compete with Ohio State, who's spending like $24 million a year, Nebraska's spending 4 or 5. There's a gap there.
Yeah.
He mentioned that to me in a one-on-one meeting I had with him and his coaches in his coach's office. Like, he said it in press conference in the past. He said it recently. He's probably going to reiterate it again. Like, if you really want to be on that level, and Nebraska's not short when it comes to donors and money and funds. Okay. Right. We need to be on that level, and you need to give me a fair playing field. And then hopefully I can be a really good coach and help us win some of those games. The other thing it does, if we're being honest, if we don't win a certain amount of games, there's a bit of an out there. And I'm not saying he's looking for an out, but it is. Like, if I play you and you've got a team full of 85s and mine's 75 and you beat me by a touchdown, it'll be like, well, you had the better team. Okay. I mean, that's a fair out to take. I don't know that he's looking for one, but it's there. I think really what he wants the most is help me more so I can put a better team on the field.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And with, the NIL, like you said, we do have money, and it's not, when people talk about or NIL not being up to par, I think they're like, no, but we have money. We do. But like you said, these Ohio States, these Oregons, like, they have more money. And like Matt Rule said, they're going to continue to grow. They're not just waiting for us to catch up and stuff like that. So, I do think there's a little bit of urgency when he says these things, and it's, kind of a call to action, especially because, we got guys like Michael Terry and David Sanders visiting this weekend. Those are guys that we're in competition with schools like, Ohio State, Tennessee, those schools, that have money, Georgia. But they also have winning on their side as well, too. So, there's a couple of factors working against Nebraska until we can kind of win. I think it's a huge, huge win that we're getting some of these guys even to campus, especially multiple times, ending up in their top 2s, top 4s, even guys like Dawson Merritt. I think that's a win. And I think eventually, those guys, more and more of those guys will convert to commitments. But right now, it's just a couple things working against them. And until, the winning comes, they're going to need that money. They're going to need to throw money at these guys because, Michael Terry's got Texas coming after him. Texas has big money, big money. So moving forward to this recruiting weekend. So we got Isaiah Mosey, who I mentioned earlier, son of Jamar Mosey, coming over from Oregon. They've been, Oregon fans, in talking with them, they've been kind of lukewarm on his commitment level as it was. So he will be visiting this weekend. Michael Terry, of course, is visiting this weekend. Nebraska's battling it out with Texas and Oregon for him. I think Nebraska's probably in third there. So I do think Oregon right now has the lead. And of course, Texas is his home state. He's mentioned how he loves to play close to home, but Nebraska seems to be more of a fit in terms of how they want to use him. So he'll be visiting all those 3 schools to finalize details around NIL and all that stuff, even though he said NIL isn't the most important thing to him. But I think the biggest news is the David Sanders, coming in today, and the Epley meeting at the airport, Dylan Raiola's peer recruiting of him and trying to get all the people out there that they can. What is that like for a recruit coming into an atmosphere like that? And are things like that stuff that can sway these recruits and put them over the edge against, a team that's closer to home, like a Tennessee that Nebraska seems to be lockstep with and battling for them?
So a couple of real quick things. Number one, keeping and retaining Matt Rhule would be huge, because how many millions of dollars are we paying to coaches that aren't even here anymore, first and foremost? So that would help our NIL fund. Okay. And winning. Yeah. The more you win, the more people want to come play for you. And what's amazing to me is Nebraska hasn't, like what I think of just being a team that competes for championships year in and year out, hasn't been quite the same really since maybe 2001. Yeah. I mean, 2009 should have won the championship. There's things here and there, played for the Big 12 championship, 2012, et cetera, or the Big 10 championship, 2012, et cetera, et cetera. But what we've been able to do recruiting wise with the lack of wins that we have had, when people tell me Nebraska is not relevant, bull crap.
Yeah.
Look at what we've done and we haven't won. There's kids who want to come here because of Nebraska's program recognition, albeit a long time ago. It still residuates with a lot of people. Now, if we can do some more current winning, that would help a lot more. To answer your question, if he steps off that airplane and let's say there's 300 Husker fans there, that absolutely has an impact.
Yep.
So I actually recently, spent way too much time in the airport. By the way, I've had eight consecutive delayed flights.
Oh man.
I was
blind at that point.
Oh my gosh. So I was almost home and they turned the flight around and went back to Denver last night before I got to. I've never had a flight turned around before. It was 1,000 degrees on the airplane. That didn't help. I was a little grouchy. My point is simply this. I read Tommy Frazier's book during my thousands of hours of delays recently. The major reason he came to Nebraska was the relationship with the coaches. Matt Rhule's great at relationships.
Yep.
Okay. And the people really stuck out to him. He had already taken 4 recruiting trips. Okay. Notre Dame, Clemson were 2 of his favorites. Colorado was actually one of his favorites until they took, I think it was Detmer, they said in the book, and then they weren't going to run the option and they kind of fell off. But he wasn't even going to come to Nebraska because they were his 5th recruiting visit, and he was tired. He didn't want to do it anymore. His mom's like, you said you were going to go. You need to go. He ends up committing to Nebraska over all the other schools when he wasn't even going to come. And a large part of it was his relationships with Kevin Steele at the time, his main recruiter, Tom Osborne, and just the people of Nebraska. And also it was unseasonably about 30 degrees warmer that time of year than it typically is that time of year. So that helped a little bit. But he still lives here to this day. So a place that he wasn't even going to take an official visit, he has lived in since the early 90s, since 1992, because of the people. He will tell you it's the people. So when you step off that plane, have a great relationship with Matt Rhule. I don't know who his main recruiter is, but whoever it is, have a great relationship. And then you got 5-star Dylan Raiola, probably the starting quarterback, future of the program, rallying a bunch of people, a bunch of Husker fans, a few hundred Husker fans, who knows how many, and you step off that plane and that's what you see and that's what you experience. And he might step off the plane to all these other schools that he's going to, and it's just going to be a couple of coaches there. That absolutely, and that's not a bad thing, but it absolutely is a difference maker. Okay, Nebraska is cold, it doesn't have a beach, et cetera, but the people, there is no place like Nebraska. So use that to your advantage.
Yeah, and talking about the relationships, I think that's the biggest factor in this is David Sanders. Nebraska got him very late in the process. Most of these schools have been recruiting him for multiple years, some of them 4 years. And Nebraska got into the race when Dylan Raiola came over to Nebraska because they were both being recruited to Georgia, so they had built that relationship there, and then Nebraska offered. So they got in late in the process, and they still seem to be one of the final two with Tennessee. Ohio State's still in the mix. They're still communicating, but these last two visits being to Tennessee and Nebraska, bode well for Nebraska. Tennessee, I think, gets the final visit, so we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, I just was really interested in your take on this big recruiting weekend. So we wait and see how this ends up and the results come out from this. So, but yeah, I know you're little. I want to get you out of here. Be respectful for your time. So. One last time, I appreciate you coming on. And again, if you want to tell the people what you got coming up or anything like that on the channels or anything like that, feel free to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so the CARRIKER Chronicles will return August 25th. Normally it's August 1st. The family and I are moving. It's been insanity, but it's August 25th, which is the Sunday night leading into Nebraska's first game that following Saturday versus UTEP. And it will be posted on YouTube, CARRIKERChronicles.com. I am on all the social medias, Facebook, X, and I'm going to resurrect my dead Instagram account. I haven't posted on it in about 12 years. So I'm going to resurrect it's not dead, it's just sitting there. I'm going to resurrect that account. So follow me on any of those platforms as well.
Awesome, man. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we'll have you back on. And again, go check out CARRIKERChronicles.com. You can find my stuff there. You can find a bunch of other creator stuff there. A lot of good stuff for there. Quick access to articles, the whole nine. So it's a one-stop shop for everything you need. So with that being said, I'm going to sign off here and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.